Admiral Kalen Voss watched the crimson glow spread across Neptune's rings like spilled blood against the void. The alien fleet had materialized without warning, 17 massive dreadnoughts that defied every law of physics humanity thought it understood. Their hulls pulsed with bioluminescent veins, organic architecture that seemed to breathe in the vacuum of space. "Sir, they're broadcasting on all frequencies," Communications Officer Naira Caney reported, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. It's in perfect standard English." The transmission crackled through the bridge of the UEN Retribution, humanity's most advanced battlecruiser. The voice that emerged was melodious, almost hypnotic, yet carried an undertone of absolute authority. "Primitive species of the third orbital body. You have been selected for pacification and integration. Your resistance is acknowledged but deemed irrelevant. Surrender your military assets and prepare for processing. You have 6 of your rotational periods to comply." Voss felt ice form in his veins. Around him, the bridge crew exchanged glances that spoke volumes. They had trained for first contact, but not this. Not an ultimatum delivered with the casual indifference of someone swatting an insect. "Response, Admiral?" asked Lieutenant Commander Zaris Nomak, the ship's tactical officer. Voss studied the tactical display. Earth's combined fleet numbered 43 vessels against their 17. The number should have been encouraging, but something about the alien ship's casual positioning suggested they weren't concerned about odds. "Open a channel," Voss commanded. The view screen shimmered, revealing a being that might have once been beautiful by human standards. Its features were symmetrical, almost sculpted, but there was something profoundly wrong in its golden eyes. An emptiness that spoke of civilizations consumed, of countless worlds reduced to silence. "I am Executor Valen of the Dominion Hegemony," the being said, its lips curving in what might have been a smile. "You will address me as your superior." "I'm Admiral Kalen Voss of the United Earth Navy," Voss replied, his voice carrying the weight of humanity's defiance. "And you can go to hell." Valen's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the space around the alien fleet. The very fabric of reality seemed to ripple as the dreadnoughts began to move with impossible grace. "Your defiance is quaint," Valen said. "We have harvested 17 star systems. Your species will join the countless others who chose futile resistance over peaceful surrender." The transmission cut, and immediately the bridge erupted in controlled chaos. Sensor readings spiked as the alien vessels began to accelerate toward the inner system at velocities that should have torn them apart. "All ships, battle stations," Voss ordered. "This is Admiral Voss to all commands. Code Omega is now in effect. Defend Earth at all costs." What Executor Valen and the Dominion Hegemony didn't understand, what their consumption of 17 civilizations had failed to teach them, was that humanity had never been good at surrendering. They had clawed their way up from primordial caves, survived ice ages and plagues, wars and disasters that should have ended their species a dozen times over. As the alien fleet carved through space toward Earth, every human vessel moved to intercept. They were outgunned, outmaneuvered, and facing technology that made their best weapons look like pointed sticks. They attacked anyway. The first engagement began at the orbit of Mars, where the cruiser Dauntless opened fire with everything it had. The alien response was swift and devastating, a lance of coherent energy that should have vaporized the human ship entirely. Instead, the Dauntless rolled through the beam, its experimental reactive armor ablating but holding, and launched a full spread of quantum torpedoes that struck the alien vessel's hull with surprising effect. For the first time in her conquests, Executor, Valen felt something she had almost forgotten: uncertainty. Dr. Zephyr Caldris hunched over her workstation in the bowels of Luna Base, her fingers dancing across holographic displays as she processed the combat data streaming in from the Mars engagement. Around her, the Deep Space Analytics Division worked with the desperate efficiency of those who knew that failure meant extinction. "The energy dispersion patterns don't match any known physics," she muttered, pulling up the sensor readings from the Dauntless's successful strike. "Their hulls aren't just armored. They're actively redistributing kinetic energy across some kind of organic network." Her colleague, Dr. Kestrel Vrain, leaned over her shoulder, his cybernetic eye whirring as it processed the data streams. "Look at this resonance frequency. It's almost like they're using their entire ship as a tuning fork, dispersing impact across the whole structure." 3 days into the conflict, humanity was learning. Each engagement, each loss, provided precious data. The aliens were technologically superior, but they fought with the arrogance of a species that had never faced serious resistance. Their tactics were predictable, designed to cow primitive civilizations into submission rather than destroy a truly determined enemy. Captain Lyros Kemper of the destroyer Blackthorn had noticed it first. The alien vessels moved in perfect formation, their positioning mathematical in its precision, beautiful, elegant, and utterly inflexible. "They're not warriors," he reported to Fleet Command as his ship danced between the massive alien dreadnoughts, launching hit-and-run attacks. "They're executioners. They've never had to actually fight before." Meanwhile, aboard the lead Dominion vessel, Executor Valen felt the first stirrings of something that might have been concern. 3 of her dreadnoughts showed minor damage. Inconsequential, by any measure, but damage nonetheless. In 17 previous conquests, not a single enemy weapon had so much as scratched her ship's hulls. "Sub-Commander Krex," she called to her tactical officer, a being whose species had been among the first to fall to the hegemony. "Analysis of the primitive weapons." "The kinetic projectiles are crude but surprisingly effective," Krex reported, his voice carrying the hollow tone of the mentally dominated. "They appear to be using some form of quantum-enhanced warheads that disrupt our hull matrix on a molecular level." Valen's golden eyes narrowed. "Impossible. No species achieves quantum manipulation without first achieving faster-than-light travel. These primitives are confined to their single system." What she didn't understand was that humanity's isolation had been its strength. While other species had achieved interstellar travel and then been absorbed into the hegemony's vast network, humans had been forced to innovate within constraints. Every advancement had been hard-won, every breakthrough the result of desperate necessity rather than leisurely exploration. Dr. Caldress made the connection as she watched the 4th day's engagement data. "They're not just redistributing energy," she breathed. "They're storing it. Each hit makes them stronger." The revelation changed everything. Within hours, every human vessel was retasked with new targeting protocols. Instead of trying to overwhelm the alien ships with raw firepower, they began using precision strikes designed to overload the energy storage systems. Captain Naya Torvin of the heavy cruiser Indomitable was the first to test the new strategy. Her ship closed to point-blank range with an alien dreadnought, weathering devastating return fire as her crew launched surgical strikes at specific hull segments. "Target the junction points," she ordered as her ship shuddered under alien fire. "Where the bioluminescent veins intersect. There." The coordinated strike hit home, and for the first time since the invasion began, a Dominion dreadnought screamed. The sound was transmitted through subspace, a psychic shriek of agony that was felt by every human in the system. More importantly, it was felt by every other alien vessel. The perfect formation wavered as the damaged ship fell back, its graceful movements now erratic and pained. Executor Valen stood frozen on her bridge as the impossible happened before her eyes. A primitive species, barely beyond chemical rockets when her fleet had arrived, had hurt one of her vessels. The wounded dreadnought's hull flickered, its bioluminescent network strobing in distress patterns that spoke of damage that should have been impossible. Around it, the other ships moved protectively, their mathematical precision replaced by something almost emotional. "Sub-Commander," Valen said quietly. "Initiate Protocol 17. Krex's dominated mind processed the order with mechanical efficiency. Protocol 17. Total pacification. No prisoners, no integration. Complete extinction of the target species." But as the Dominion fleet began its acceleration toward Earth's orbit, Admiral Voss was already 3 moves ahead. Humanity had been preparing for this moment since the first alien weapon had been fired. Admiral Voss stood in the command bunker buried 3 kilometers beneath the Swiss Alps, watching as the alien fleet approached Earth's orbital space. Around him, holographic displays showed the positions of every human vessel, every defensive platform, every weapon that remained operational after 6 days of running battles. The fleet that had started with 43 ships was down to 27. But those remaining vessels bore the scars of hard learning, their crews tempered in the forge of desperate combat. "Confirmation from all strike groups," reported Commander Axis Rylan, his voice steady despite the exhaustion that lined his features. "The Hegemony fleet is maintaining predictable approach vectors." Voss nodded grimly. The aliens' mathematical precision, their perfect formations, it had been both their strength and their weakness. In 6 days of combat, they had never deviated from optimal tactical positioning, never adapted their approach based on human unpredictability. "Dr. Caldris, status on the gravitational resonance array?" The physicist looked up from her station, her eyes bright with the fever of discovery. "The lunar mass drivers have been repositioned. When the fleet reaches the designated coordinates, we can create a localized gravitational distortion that should disrupt their formation integrity." It was humanity's most desperate gambit, using the moon itself as a weapon. The lunar colonies had sacrificed their infrastructure, converting every mass driver, every mining laser, every industrial facility into components of a massive gravitational manipulation system. Aboard the lead Dominion vessel, Executor Valen felt the satisfaction of inevitable victory. The primitive species had fought with surprising tenacity, but their resistance was ending. Her damaged dreadnought had been relegated to the rear of the formation, its hull still flickering with distress patterns. But the remaining 16 vessels were more than sufficient to sterilize the third planet. "Sub-Commander Krex, prepare. The planetary bombardment arrays," she commanded. "We will reduce their world to molten slag, then harvest what remains." But as the Hegemony fleet crossed the invisible line marking Earth's gravitational sphere of influence, Captain Lyros Kemper was already in position. His destroyer Blackthorn, along with 7 other vessels, had been waiting in the shadow of Luna for this exact moment. "All units, execute Omega Protocol," Kemper broadcast on the encrypted channel. The trap that humanity had spent 6 days preparing finally sprung. The lunar mass drivers fired in perfect synchronization, hurling massive projectiles not at the alien ships, but at specific points in space around them. The gravitational distortions created by these precisely positioned masses created a resonance cascade that turned the aliens' own formation against them. Suddenly, the mathematical perfection that had been their strength became a cage. The Dominion vessels found themselves locked in gravitational eddies, their formation compressed and distorted in ways their control systems couldn't compensate for. "Now!" Voss shouted. Every remaining human vessel opened fire simultaneously. Not the scattered, desperate attacks of the past 6 days, but a coordinated barrage that had been planned down to the millisecond. Quantum torpedoes, kinetic penetrators, and experimental weapons that Dr. Caldris's team had developed based on captured alien technology, all focused on the junction points where the ship's bioluminescent networks were most vulnerable. The effect was catastrophic. 3 Hegemony dreadnoughts suffered cascade failures as their energy distribution systems overloaded. The organic hulls began to convulse, the bioluminescent veins flickering and dying as neural feedback loops destroyed the ship's central processing cores. Executor Valen felt her vessel lurch as gravitational forces she had never encountered tore at its structure. Around her, the bridge crew, representatives of a dozen conquered species, worked frantically to restore formation integrity. "Impossible!" she screamed as another of her vessels went dark, its hull rupturing along organic seam lines. "They're primitives, chemical rockets and nuclear weapons." But the humans were no longer using chemical rockets. In 6 days of total war, they had reverse-engineered alien technology, adapted their weapons, and learned to turn the hegemony's own advantages against them. Captain Naya Torvin brought the Indomitable alongside the faltering alien flagship, her crew ready for the most desperate gambit of all. "Boarding parties prepare for deployment," she ordered. "We're going inside." The magnetic grapples locked onto the alien hull, and for the first time in their history of conquest, the Dominion hegemony found enemy soldiers boarding their vessels. Torvin led the assault herself, her powered armor adapted with alien energy shielding. The corridors of the hegemony ship were organic nightmares, walls that pulsed like living tissue, floors that yielded underfoot like cartilage. But the boarding parties were prepared for psychological warfare. Each soldier had been mentally conditioned, their minds shielded by experimental neural interfaces that Dr. Vrain's team had developed from captured alien psychic technology. They fought through chambers filled with the dominated minds of conquered species, past organic computers that screamed in languages that predated human civilization. Their target was the central processing core, the living brain that controlled each Dominion vessel. When they reached it, Torvin found herself face to face with something that might once have been like the dominated crew members, but had been so thoroughly integrated with the ship's systems that it was no longer recognizably alive. "For Earth," she whispered, and activated the quantum charges her team had placed throughout the organic neural network. The explosion tore through the ship's living systems like a virus, corrupting data pathways and severing connections that had taken centuries to grow. Above them, Executor Valen felt her flagship die beneath her feet. The death scream of the Dominion flagship tore through subspace like a psychic hurricane, its frequency resonating in the quantum foam that connected all living minds in the system. Every human felt it, a moment of alien agony so profound that it transcended species barriers and spoke directly to the evolutionary fear centers of their brains. But where other conquered civilizations had been paralyzed by this psychic assault, humanity responded with something the hegemony had never encountered: rage. Dr. Zephyr Caldris collapsed at her station in Luna Base, blood streaming from her nose as the alien death scream hit her enhanced neural interfaces. But even as her consciousness reeled from the psychic feedback, her augmented mind was analyzing, categorizing, understanding. "The neural networks," she gasped, her voice carrying across the emergency comm channels. "They're all connected. Kill one ship's brain, and the others feel it." Admiral Voss received the transmission in his deep bunker, where the Earth's magnetic field provided some protection from the psychic storm raging above. Around him, his staff was recovering from the mental assault, but their eyes held a new light, the fierce satisfaction of prey that had learned to bite back. "All vessels, this is Fleet Command," Voss broadcast. "Priority target, the organic processing cores. Dr. Keldris has identified a cascade vulnerability in their neural network. Each ship we take down makes the others weaker. Captain Lyros Kemper, his destroyer Blackthorn dancing between the now chaotic alien formations, felt grim satisfaction as he processed the orders. The hegemony fleet was no longer moving in perfect mathematical precision. Their formations had dissolved into something approaching panic as ship after ship reported cascade failures in their organic control systems. "Target the next flagship," Kemper ordered his crew. Ramming speed, the Blackthorn accelerated directly toward a hegemony dreadnought, its reinforced prow glowing with accumulated energy from the ship's overcharged engines. The alien vessel fired desperately, its energy weapons scorching the human ship's hull, but the destroyer's reactive armor held long enough for impact. The collision should have been suicide for the smaller human vessel. Instead, the Blackthorn's experimental quantum ram punched through the alien ship's organic hull like a needle through skin, penetrating deep into the vessel's core before the destroyer's entire arsenal detonated simultaneously. The explosion tore the hegemony dreadnought apart from within, its bioluminescent network flaring once before going dark forever. Aboard the dying command vessel, Executor Valen felt something she had not experienced in 3 centuries of conquest: fear. Her perfect fleet was being systematically destroyed by a species that should have been brushed aside like cosmic dust. "Sub-Commander Krex," she commanded, her melodious voice now edged with desperation. "Activate the Harvest Protocol. Begin immediate biomass extraction from the 3rd planet." It was the hegemony's final weapon. Not conquest, but consumption. If they could not dominate humanity, they would devour every living thing on Earth and use the biological mass to rebuild their fleet. The remaining Dominion vessels began to descend toward Earth's atmosphere, their hulls reconfiguring into something even more nightmarish: organic harvesters designed to strip entire biospheres down to their component molecules. But humanity had one more surprise waiting. Deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, in trenches that had never seen sunlight, Dr. Kestrel Vrain's most secret project activated. The Leviathan Array, a network of quantum resonators built into the Earth's tectonic structure itself, came online with a subsonic hum that traveled through the planet's crust. "This will either save us or crack the planet in half," Vrain reported, to Admiral Voss. "The resonators are designed to create a quantum field that should disrupt organic neural networks on a planetary scale." "Do it," Voss ordered without hesitation. The Leviathan Array fired, sending quantum pulses through the Earth's magnetic field and up into the orbital zone where the hegemony harvesters were beginning their descent. The effect was immediate and catastrophic for the aliens. Every organic system on the Dominion vessels began to convulse as quantum interference tore through their neural pathways. Ships that had survived the destruction of stars found their own nervous systems turning against them, organic computers corrupting their own data, biological hulls rejecting the consciousness that had controlled them for millennia. Captain Naya. Torvin, her heavy cruiser, Indomitable, now stripped of half its armor but still fighting, watched as the nearest hegemony harvester began to tear itself apart. The ship's organic hull was peeling away in strips, revealing the mechanical skeleton beneath. Technology from some conquered species, now freed from biological domination. "They're not one species," she realized, broadcasting the revelation to the fleet. "They're a parasite. The ships, the crew, they're all conquered civilizations being puppeted by the organic neural networks." The revelation changed everything. As the quantum interference from the Leviathan Array continued to disrupt the hegemony's control systems, the true nature of their enemy became clear. The beautiful, symmetrical beings like Executor Valen were just another conquered species, their minds hollowed out and filled with the hegemony's collective consciousness. And now that consciousness was dying, ship by ship, neural network by neural network, Valen herself felt the change as her own mind began to clear for the first time in centuries. The golden emptiness in her eyes flickered, replaced by something that might have been recognition or horror at what she had become. "What? What have we done?" she whispered, staring at her hands as if seeing them for the first time. But there was no time for philosophical revelations. The quantum storm was tearing through the hegemony fleet, like acid through living tissue, and the organic ships were responding by turning on each other, their corrupted control systems unable to distinguish between ally and enemy. The systematic extermination that had begun 6 days ago was becoming a rout. In the depths of space where the outer engagement zones had become graveyards of twisted metal and dying light, something unprecedented was happening. The Dominion hegemony, conqueror of 17 star systems, consumer of countless civilizations, was learning what it meant to lose. Commander Axis Rylan piloted his reconnaissance frigate Meridian through the debris field that had once been the alien formation's left flank. Around him, the wreckage told a story that would have been unthinkable a week ago. Human weapons embedded in alien hulls, hegemony dreadnoughts torn apart by their own failing neural networks. And most significantly, life pods the aliens were abandoning ship. Fleet Command, this is Meridian Actual, Rylan reported, his voice tight with amazement. I'm reading multiple evacuation signatures from the damaged hegemony vessels. They're running. Admiral Voss felt a moment of savage satisfaction. In his bunker command center, the psychic entities that had dominated organic technology for millennia were discovering mortality. And they didn't like the taste. But the satisfaction was tempered by the reports flooding in from Earth's surface. The hegemony's desperate harvesting attempts had caused massive damage before being disrupted. Entire coastal cities were gone, their populations consumed by organic harvesters that had managed to breach the atmosphere before the Leviathan array had torn them apart. Casualty reports, Voss requested grimly. Preliminary estimates suggest 40 million dead or missing, sir, reported his aide. The biological harvesters, they worked fast. The number hit the bridge like a physical blow. 40 million lives, the price of humanity's defiance. In the silence that followed, every person in the command center felt the weight of what resistance had cost, but they also felt something else. The knowledge that surrender would have meant 8 billion dead instead of 40 million. High above, the battle was entering its final phase. Captain Naya Torvin brought the battered Indomitable alongside the largest remaining hegemony vessel, the command ship where Executor Velin was making her last stand. The alien vessel's hull was a patchwork of failing organic systems and exposed mechanical framework, its bioluminescent networks flickering like a dying heartbeat. "This is Captain Torvin to Hegemony Command," she broadcast on all frequencies. "Surrender now, and we'll allow evacuation of your surviving crew." The response came not from Velin, but from something deeper within the ship, a voice that spoke in harmonics no human throat could produce, layered with the psychic weight of consumed civilizations. "We are the Dominion. We are eternal. We do not surrender to food." Dr. Zephyr Caldress, monitoring the exchange from Luna Base, felt her enhanced neural interfaces spike with recognition. "Admiral, that's not Valen speaking. That's the core consciousness, the original hegemony mind that's been controlling everything." The revelation sent chills through the human fleet. Somewhere in the depths of that dying command ship was the entity that had orchestrated the consumption of 17 star systems, billions upon billions of sentient beings reduced to biological components in its endless hunger. "All vessels, this is Admiral Voss," came the fleet-wide broadcast. "That ship doesn't leave this system alive, whatever it takes." But before the human fleet could coordinate a final assault, the Hegemony Command ship began to change. Its hull was reshaping itself, organic components flowing like liquid as the vessel prepared for something that made every sensor array in the system scream warnings. "It's building a singularity generator," Dr. Caldress reported, her voice tight with horror. "If it can't consume us, it's going to collapse the entire system into a black hole." The mathematics were terrifying. A singularity detonation at Earth's orbital distance would drag the inner planets into gravitational collapse, effectively destroying the solar system even if humanity somehow survived the initial event. Captain Lyros Kemper, his destroyer Long, since reduced to a skeleton crew and failing systems, made the decision that would define humanity's victory. The Blackthorn, already structurally compromised from its ramming attack, could carry one more payload. "All vessels, this is Kemper," he broadcast as his ship began its final acceleration toward the Hegemony Command vessel. "I'm carrying every Quantum torpedo we have left. Cover my approach. What followed was the most desperate 60 seconds in human history. Every remaining ship in the fleet converged on the Hegemony command vessel, their weapons tearing at its hull as it struggled. To complete the singularity generator, energy beams that could boil oceans lashed out at the approaching human ships, but they pressed forward anyway, buying Kemper the seconds he needed. The Blackthorn struck the alien command ship at relativistic velocity, its hull already glowing. White-hot from the enemy fire it had absorbed during its final run. The impact drove the destroyer deep into the organic superstructure of the Hegemony vessel, penetrating layers of biological armor and mechanical framework until it reached the core where the ancient consciousness waited. In that moment, as quantum, torpedoes designed to tear apart space-time itself detonated in the heart of the Hegemony command ship. Two very different forms of intelligence met for the first and last time. The Dominion core consciousness, ancient beyond measure, touched the mind of Captain Lyros Kemper in the instant before both were consumed by quantum fire. For a microsecond that lasted eternity, predator and prey understood each other completely. The Hegemony consciousness, shaped by eons of consumption and domination, felt something it had never experienced, the willing sacrifice of one being for the survival of many. It was a concept so alien to its nature that it couldn't process the information, couldn't understand how a species could be stronger through voluntary sacrifice than through forced assimilation. And Kemper, in that final moment, saw the true scope of what they had defeated. Not just 17 star systems, but hundreds, thousands of civilizations that had fallen to the Hegemony's hunger over the millennia. Each one had fought, each one had resisted, but none had possessed the particular combination of technological innovation and absolute bloody-mindedness that had allowed humanity to turn the tables. The explosion that consumed both ship and consciousness lit up the inner system like a newborn star, its quantum fire burning through dimensions that normal matter couldn't touch. When the light faded, nothing remained of the Hegemony command vessel except a rapidly dispersing cloud of exotic particles. The surviving alien ships, their controlling consciousness destroyed, began to shut down one by one as their organic systems failed without central coordination. In his command bunker, Admiral Voss watched the tactical display as the last Hegemony signature winked out. Around him, the surviving members of his staff stood in stunned silence, unable to quite believe what they were seeing. "Sir," Commander Rylan reported quietly, "all enemy vessels have gone dark. We're reading massive system failures across their entire fleet." Voss nodded slowly, feeling the weight of victory settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. They had won, but the cost? "Begin search and rescue operations for any surviving alien crew members," he ordered, "and get me casualty reports from all remaining vessels." As the surviving human ships began the grim task of searching for survivors, among the wreckage a new understanding began to emerge. The beings they had been fighting, creatures like Executor Valen, weren't the enemy. They were victims, just as much as humanity would have been if the invasion had succeeded. The real enemy had been something far more insidious, the idea that strength came from domination, that survival required the consumption of others, that the universe was a zero-sum game where one species' victory required another's extinction. Humanity had proven that assumption wrong, but the lesson had come at a price that would echo through the generations. 3 weeks after the Battle of Sol, Admiral Kalen Voss stood in the observation deck of the orbital station that had been hastily constructed from salvaged Hegemony technology. Below him, Earth turned slowly in space, its surface still bearing the scars of the alien harvesting attempts, vast swaths of missing coastline where the organic extractors had done their work before being destroyed. But the planet was healing. Humanity had always been resilient. "The final casualty count came in this morning," reported Dr. Zephyr Caldress, her appearance still bearing the marks of exhaustion from weeks of non-stop work. 42 million confirmed dead, another 8 million still missing and presumed lost to the harvesters. 50 million human lives, the cost of survival. Voss had authorized memorials on every world and station in the system, but he knew that no monument could truly capture the scope of what had been lost. And the survivors from the hegemony fleet? That's more complicated, Caldress admitted. We've recovered approximately 15,000 individuals from various species. Most of them are showing signs of severe neural damage from the breakdown of the organic control networks. Dr. Vrain's team is working on rehabilitation protocols, but she didn't need to finish. The beings who had served as the hegemonies, foot soldiers, were victims of the same parasitic consciousness that had consumed 17 star systems. Helping them recover their individual identities would be a process measured in years, not months. In the medical bay of Luna Base, Dr. Kestrel, Vrain was conducting one of the most important interviews in human history. Across from him sat the being who had once been Executor Valen, her golden eyes now clear but haunted by memories of centuries spent as an unwilling puppet of the Dominion consciousness. "I remember fragments," she said, her melodious voice barely above a whisper. "My people were the Veltar. We achieved faster-than-light travel approximately 800 years ago, by your measurement. We thought we were explorers, seeking contact with other civilizations." Vrain nodded encouragingly. The rehabilitation sessions were yielding crucial intelligence about the hegemony's methods and the fate of the conquered civilizations. The first contact with the Dominion entity was subtle, Valen continued. They presented themselves as a benevolent collective, offering to share knowledge and resources. By the time we realized what was happening, the organic neural networks had already been integrated into our ships, our cities, our very bodies. "How many civilizations were there?" Vrain asked gently. "How many species were consumed by the hegemony?" Valen's expression crumpled. I was forced to participate in the conquest of 47 star systems. But the entity's memories stretched back much further. Hundreds of civilizations, thousands of years of consumption. Your species was intended to be the beginning of expansion into this galactic arm. The implications were staggering. The battle for Sul hadn't just been humanity's survival. It had been the first major defeat of a galaxy-spanning parasite that had been growing unchecked for millennia. Meanwhile, in the HFY asteroid belt, salvage operations were revealing the true scope of hegemony technology. Captain Naya Torven, promoted to admiral after her successful boarding actions, supervised the careful dismantling of the larger alien wrecks. "The organic components are fascinating from a biological standpoint," reported her chief science officer. "But the mechanical frameworks are what's really interesting. We're seeing technology from dozens of different species, all integrated into hybrid systems." Torven nodded grimly. Each piece of salvage technology represented a conquered civilization, their innovations absorbed into the hegemony's collective arsenal. But now those technologies could serve a different purpose: defense against any remaining Dominion forces that might exist in distant star systems. Because that was the question that haunted every strategic planning session. Was this the only hegemony fleet, or were there others? "The neural patterns we've analyzed suggest this was a scouting force," Dr. Caldress reported to the emergency session of Earth's Planetary Council. "The Dominion consciousness spoke of expansion into this galactic arm, which implies they have established territories elsewhere." President Corvain Mellox, one of the few political leaders to survive the initial harvesting attacks, rubbed his temples wearily. "So we're looking at the possibility of more invasions?" "It's likely," Admiral Voss confirmed. "But we have advantages now that we didn't have before. We understand their technology, their tactics, and most importantly, their weakness: the centralized consciousness that controls their fleets. The quantum resonance technology that had disrupted the hegemony's neural networks was already being incorporated into Earth's defensive systems. More importantly, the psychological breakthrough of understanding that the Dominion could be defeated had spread throughout human space like wildfire. Humanity had faced extinction and emerged stronger. In the weeks that followed, as Earth began, the long process of recovery and the solar system prepared for possible future conflicts, a new philosophy began to emerge from the ashes of the invasion. The concept of tactical annihilation, not the destruction of an enemy, but the complete dismantling of their ability to cause harm while preserving what could be saved. The hegemony fleet hadn't just been destroyed, it had been dissected, analyzed, and ultimately converted into tools for defense and exploration. The surviving crew members weren't executed as war criminals, but treated as fellow victims in need of rehabilitation. It was a uniquely human approach to victory, one that had never occurred to the Dominion consciousness in its millennia of conquest. But perhaps the most significant development was happening in the outer system, where teams of human and recovered alien scientists were working together to reverse engineer hegemony faster-than-light technology. For the first time in its history, humanity would be able to reach beyond Sol, to explore the galaxy and potentially warn other civilizations about the Dominion threat. "We're not just surviving anymore," Admiral Voss observed as he watched the first prototype interstellar drive being tested near Pluto. "We're expanding. We're taking the fight to them." The age of human expansion into the galaxy was about to begin, and it would be driven not by conquest or consumption, but by the simple principle that no species should suffer the fate that had nearly befallen Earth. The Dominion hegemony had invaded Sol to harvest another civilization. Instead, they had awakened something far more dangerous: humanity's protective instincts on a galactic scale. 5 years after the Battle of Sol, the first human interstellar vessel prepared for its maiden voyage beyond the solar system. The UEN Redemption was a hybrid creation, human engineering married to salvaged hegemony technology, but guided by principles the Dominion had never understood. Admiral Kalen Voss, now bearing the scars of 5 years spent rebuilding human civilization, stood on the bridge of humanity's first starship. Around him, a crew that represented the best of both species worked in harmony, humans and recovered hegemony survivors united by a common purpose. Commander Naira Kaney, her neural interfaces now enhanced with hybrid technology that allowed direct communication with the ship's organic components, reported from the navigation station. "FTL drive is stable, Admiral. We're ready for translation to the Kepler 442 system." Their destination was 17 light-years from Earth, the former homeworld of the Veltar, Valen's people. If the rehabilitation programs had been successful, if the recovered memories were accurate, they would find a world still bearing the scars of Dominion consumption, but potentially harboring survivors. More importantly, they would begin the process of warning other civilizations about the hegemony threat and offering an alternative to conquest. Dr. Caldress, status on the quantum resonance array? The physicist, her hair now streaked with premature gray from years of pushing the boundaries of known science, looked up from her station with satisfaction. "The planetary scale disruptors are online and ready for deployment. If we encounter any active Dominion forces, we can disable their neural networks from interstellar range." It was humanity's gift to the galaxy, a weapon that could free enslaved minds without destroying the beings trapped within hegemony control systems. Every human vessel now carried the technology, and the plans were freely shared with any civilization willing to stand against the Dominion. Captain Lyros Kemper's sacrifice had given them more than victory. It had given them the tools to prevent other species from facing humanity's choice between extinction and resistance. "Translation in 30 seconds, Kaney announced. Voss felt the familiar mixture of anticipation and dread that came with stepping into the unknown. But this time, humanity wasn't facing the darkness alone. Beside him, Valen, now serving as the ship's cultural liaison and expert on Dominion tactics, prepared to return to a home she hadn't seen with clear eyes in 8 centuries. "Whatever we find there," she said quietly, "thank you for giving us the chance to go home." The Redemption's hybrid drive engaged, tearing a hole in space-time itself and hurling the vessel across 17 light-years in an instant. But as they emerged in the Kepler system, what they found was both heartbreaking and inspiring. The Veltar homeworld hung in space like a wounded jewel, its surface scarred by centuries of organic harvesting. Vast sections of continents had been stripped bare, their biomass consumed to fuel hegemony expansion. But there were lights, cities that had somehow survived, civilizations that had endured despite the Dominion's attention turning elsewhere. "I'm reading multiple transmission sources," reported the communications officer, his voice tight with excitement. "They're broadcasting in the old Veltar languages, the ones from before the conquest." Valen's golden eyes filled with tears as the voices of her people reached across the void. Survivors who had hidden, who had resisted, who had maintained their culture despite 8 centuries of oppression. "This is Admiral Voss of the United Earth Navy to all Veltar stations," he broadcast. "We come in peace, bearing news of the Dominion's defeat and offering aid in your recovery." The response came in the form of a transmission that would be remembered throughout galactic history, not for its words, but for the raw emotion that transcended species barriers. "This is Keeper Jalvin of the Hidden Archives," came the reply. "We have waited 800 years for word that the Dominion could be defeated. Are our people among you?" The reunion that followed, as shuttles carried, recovered Veltar. Survivors down to their homeworld for the first time in centuries became the template for humanity's expansion into the galaxy, not as conquerors seeking resources or territory, but as liberators offering hope to civilizations that had given up on freedom. Over the following months, as the Redemption traveled from system to system, the pattern repeated. Worlds stripped, bare by Dominion harvesting but still harboring survivors. Species driven to the edge of extinction but maintaining the spark of independence that the hegemony had never been able to completely extinguish. And in each system, humanity offered the same thing: the quantum resonance technology to break Dominion control, the tactical knowledge to defeat hegemony fleets, and perhaps most importantly, the proof that resistance was possible. The galaxy began to change. Dr. Kestrel Vrain, now leading the Interstellar Rehabilitation Project from a research station in the Centauri system, received reports that would have seemed like fantasy 5 years earlier. Entire hegemony sectors going dark as their control networks collapsed. Former slave species emerging from hiding, armed with human-designed quantum disruptors, and the knowledge that they were not alone in their resistance. The Dominion consciousness, that ancient parasite that had consumed civilizations for millennia, found itself facing something it had never encountered: a coordinated galactic resistance movement. But the most significant moment came during the Redemption's visit to the Rigel system, where they encountered something unprecedented, an active hegemony fleet engaged in the conquest of a species called the Nexari. 17 dreadnoughts, just like the force that attacked Earth, reported Caney from her station. But the local defenders are putting up significant resistance. Admiral Voss studied the tactical display, seeing patterns that were both familiar and strange. The Nexari were fighting with tactics clearly adapted from human combat doctrines: hit and run. Attacks targeting neural network junctions, coordinated strikes designed to overload hegemony energy distribution systems. "They've learned from our example," he realized. "Word of our victory has spread faster than we have." The battle that followed was humanity's first large-scale engagement since the Battle of Sol, but it was profoundly different from that desperate defense. The Redemption and its escort vessels didn't fight alone. They coordinated with Nexari forces, who had been preparing for this moment for years, guided by intelligence reports that had traveled across the galaxy through underground networks of resistance. The hegemony fleet, expecting another easy conquest, instead found itself facing opponents who understood their weaknesses and had weapons specifically designed to exploit them. The quantum resonance bombardment from the human vessels disrupted the Dominion control networks, while Nexari ships armed with reverse-engineered technology struck at the moment of maximum confusion. Within 6 hours, another hegemony fleet was nothing but debris and rescued prisoners. But this time, the victory belonged to the galaxy itself, not just to humanity. In the years that followed, as human exploration vessels reached deeper into Dominion-controlled space, they carried more than weapons and technology. They carried a message that resonated across species barriers and cultural divides. The universe was not a zero-sum game, cooperation was stronger than domination, and no species had to face extinction alone. The Dominion hegemony, that ancient predator that had fed on civilizations for millennia, found its vast empire crumbling as world after world threw off the neural shackles that had bound them. The organic ships that had once been symbols of inevitable conquest became monuments to liberation as their control systems were systematically dismantled by species they had once enslaved. And at the center of it all, humanity continued to expand, not as conquerors, but as teachers, sharing the hard-won knowledge that had saved Earth and could save countless others. 10 years after the invasion of Sol, Admiral Voss stood once again on an observation deck. But this time he looked out not at a single star system, but at a galaxy in the process of transformation. Around him, representatives from 47 liberated species worked together on projects that would have been impossible under Dominion. Rule, art, science, exploration, driven not by hunger but by curiosity. The latest reports from the Outer Rim, announced Dr. Caldress, now serving as humanity's chief xenological advisor. 3 more hegemony sectors have gone silent. Their control networks have collapsed, and the freed species are establishing their own governments. Voss nodded, feeling a satisfaction deeper than victory. They had done more than survive the Dominion invasion. They had transformed it into the catalyst for galactic liberation. "Any word from the deep space monitoring stations?" he asked. "The quantum resonance detectors haven't picked up any major hegemony fleet movements in 6 months," Caldress reported. "It's possible we've encountered the majority of their forces, but we stay vigilant," Voss finished. "The price of freedom is eternal preparation." As he spoke those words, a new transmission reached the station. Not a distress call this time, but something far more precious. It was a message from the Andromeda Galaxy, transmitted by a species that had somehow managed to observe the liberation of the Milky Way from across the intergalactic void. To the species called humanity and their allies, the message began, "We have watched your resistance to the Dominion hegemony with great interest. We face a similar threat in our galaxy, a different parasite, but one that follows similar patterns of consumption and control. We request your knowledge, your techniques, and if possible, your aid." Voss smiled as he realized that humanity's greatest adventure was just beginning. They had saved their own galaxy, but the universe was vast, and there were other civilizations facing their own versions of the Dominion threat. The species that had once been confined to a single star system, that had faced extinction and emerged stronger, was about to become the galaxy's, and perhaps the universe's, greatest hope for freedom. In the end, the Dominion hegemony had invaded the Sol system, expecting to harvest another primitive civilization. Instead, they had awakened something far more dangerous than they could have imagined: humanity's infinite capacity for growth, adaptation, and the absolute refusal to let others suffer the fate they had barely escaped. The stars, as it turned out, had been waiting for someone exactly like humanity, a species stubborn enough to fight impossible odds, innovative enough to turn disadvantages into advantages, and compassionate enough to share the fruits of victory with former enemies. The hegemony had come to Sol as conquerors and left in pieces, but their defeat had given birth to something beautiful, a galaxy where cooperation triumphed over consumption, where diversity was strength rather than weakness, and where no species would ever again face extinction alone. Humanity had not just survived their trial by fire, they had become the fire that would burn away the darkness between the stars, one liberated world at a time. The invasion was over. The real work was just beginning. And across the galaxy, in systems that had known only fear for millennia, species looked up at the stars and saw not the approach of devourers, but the promise of friends they had never thought possible. The universe, it seemed, had been waiting for someone to teach it that there was a better way.